And we are live. Welcome, everyone. Welcome to the Be the Ultimate Assistant podcast. I am your host, Bonnie Low-Kramen, and I am joined here by my co-host, digital productivity expert, Vicki Sokol-Evans. In this podcast, Vicki and I tackle the burning workplace issues, and we bring in leading experts to share their expertise and their knowledge so that you, our listeners, can go away with some leading edge information that will actually make a difference in your life and in your careers. That's the plan. And that is exactly what we are going to be doing today. We're bringing in two very special experts in HR. We're very grateful to have our listeners and viewers from all over the world coming into this call. Please feel free in the chat to indicate what city you're in. We'd love to know what part of the world you're coming in from. Hello, Vicki.
Hello, Bon. Good to see you.
It's great to see you. So excited for today when we're going to be talking about human resources and all the changes that have been happening in the workplace for executive assistants, especially in light of the pandemic, which it's been massive. You know, it was like 5 minutes notice and they got sent home to work from home. Let me ask, what are you excited about regarding today's episode?
For me, first of all, I'm excited about all the questions you're going to be asking because you have a ton. But beyond that, I have three things I'm super excited about. Number one, we're both former assistants, so I'd love to hear the HR's perspective of their perception of the role of the assistant. Number one. Number two, since I'm a digital productivity trainer, I'd like to, talk about digital skills and what's expected from assistants in the role. And then the third thing is how to create a partnership between assistants and HR to achieve organizational objectives and goals. So those are my three things.
Fantastic. And so our listeners better buckle up and get ready because we are going to be moving through a lot of meaty material. So let's get going. I'd love to introduce our two guests to you. We are going to be joined here today by Johnny C. Taylor Jr. He is the president and CEO of SHRM. He is joined by Emily M. Dickens. She is not only the chief of staff, but corporate secretary and head of government affairs for SHRM. SHRM stands for the Society for Human Resource Management. Both Johnny and Emily have legal backgrounds, and they have just vast backgrounds, which I know you'll find very interesting in their LinkedIn profiles. My assistant, Jen, who's behind the scenes, is putting links inside the chat for future contact with our guests. Both Johnny and Emily work with executive assistants. Johnny's been working with Stephanie Riley for 10 years. In fact, not only at SHRM, but at his prior work. And Emily Dickens has been also working with an executive assistant, Tammy Wiggs, at SHRM since she began there. So we are very happy to know that they have business partners who help them with their work. Can we please give a very warm virtual welcome to Johnny C. Taylor Jr. and Emily M. Dickens? Yay!
Yay, I'm clapping. I'm going to clap.
Yeah. And there they come.
Hi, Emily.
There they come. Welcome, welcome.
Hey, everyone. Welcome to Dallas, where I'm sitting right now. And Emily?
Welcome from Durham, North Carolina, where I am right now.
It's a miracle. It's a miracle. And Vicki, where are you? We didn't say where we're from.
I'm in Austin, Texas. So, Johnny, we're right next to each other.
Road.
Yeah.
And I'm in Ponte Vedra, Florida. So it's just a miracle, this technology we have going on. Johnny and Emily, we are so grateful to have you here. I'm so happy it worked out, and the community is very excited. I want to just kind of set the stage for all of our listeners to know that the main motivation to have this conversation today was to discover realistic and reasonable ways for executive assistants to work with HR, to work better with HR, to collaborate, to cooperate. Certainly, since the pandemic, HR has their hands full, and we want to know what's going on. It's important, however, in that frame of what's been happening, to acknowledge that pre-pandemic, there was a lot of conversation about HR and EAs already. And I don't think this is going to be a surprise to you. Until March, Vicki and I were traveling the world and teaching and training assistants. And what we have heard a lot is that EAs have often viewed the relationship with HR as somewhat contentious, as somewhat them versus us. EAs have said that leaders and HR don't always understand the role and don't truly value the role, and that there seems to be a disconnect between what's really happening and what is being thought about regarding this role. And on top of all of that, there is fear and some mistrust. So in light of that, the elephants in the room, how does HR view EAs truly, Johnny and Emily? And how can we bridge these communication gaps if they exist in companies? And of course, I know our viewers and our listeners would certainly welcome hearing about the partnerships that you have with your assistants. So Johnny, might we start with you?
Sure. And thank you all for giving me the opportunity. Bonnie reached out to me. I don't know, one of us reached out to each other on LinkedIn. You want to talk about an amazing networking tool, professional networking tool. Everyone plays with Facebook, but the reality is, it's kind of nice to be able to reach out to someone in a professional context and get a professional response and begin building relationships. So Bonnie, thank you so much for our connection. And Vicki, great to have you here. And of course, it's always wonderful to have Emily M. Dickens, because I don't do anything without her. We jokingly say she's my work wife. And the husband's okay with it. The real husband's okay with it. But we literally work that closely together, which is actually a nice segue into this whole conversation around EAs and executive assistants and secretaries and special assistants, whatever the title that you're going by. I think Bonnie's earlier observations about sometimes a contentious relationship between assistants and executives, be they in HR. I was once a general counsel, so legal. I've been a CEO now for 10 years. So it's really kind of common. I don't think it's unique to HR. It's very much about perception on one hand and perception on both sides, right? Do you perceive yourself as truly being an assistant, helping the executive get the job done? Notice, I didn't say get his or her job done. It's all our job for an organization to be successful, right? And so I've never thought hierarchical sort of, and let me take you quickly back through my background. I started my career as a lawyer in a big firm, and two things probably informed my worldview of assistants and why I hold them in such high regard. First of all, you can't get your job done as a lawyer without a wonderful, technically proficient, culturally aligned assistant. It's just impossible, right? You need that person to help you get the job done. And so from day one, I walked into a law firm realizing that if I was going to be effective, then that person had to be effective. And, it wasn't to me or them, it was both of us needed to do it. So it started that. The other thing is realistically, and Bonnie and I, she'll tell you, I was kind of surprised to hear that there continue to be discussions around pay concerns for executive assistants, because I got to tell you, in a law firm, I remember vividly my first year that my EA made more money than I did. And I was on a large law firm, but it was partially because her base was strong, but then she also got a lot of overtime. So while we were both there for 70 hours a week, I was paid for 40 of them, and then my check stopped, and she was getting significant overtime. And by the way, valued, very, very valued. So I always thought that EAs should be well paid, were well paid. And so I was a little surprised, Bonnie, if you recall our first conversation, I said, are we still having that conversation? So that informs a little bit of my worldview, is that I come from professional services where we expect and treat everyone on our team to be professionals. And that is how I've seen the world going through. The other thing that informs it is now being, having been in HR now for 15, 20 years. Emily, that was since I was like 20. She tries to do my age math on me. So let me just tell you, I was 20 when I started this work, and I'm approaching 40 right now. But one of the things, shut up, Emily. One of the things that I got to be honest about is it's how the professionalism of the EA that largely dictates how they are perceived by the person they're working with. And so let me tell you let me slow that down a little bit. If you come in and you don't carry yourself appropriately, if you don't speak appropriately, if you don't write appropriately, if you are not there to help me get the work done, then I don't hold you in high regard, because we value those people who help us get the job done. And notice, I'm very intentional in not saying getting my job done, getting the job done. And so I have had the great fortune of always working with, and by the way, my former assistant before Stephanie died. She was with me for 20 years, and then she died. And that's I love Stephanie, but the only reason there's a Stephanie is because Letitia died, right? And that's how important that relationship is. And we went from company to company. As I changed jobs, she changed jobs, and I took care of her. And it was always, we were negotiated as a package. Like, I never went in to say, I'm going to get the job and good luck with your new boss. She was coming with me because the pitch that I made to every future prospective employer was, I am only as good as I have my assistant with me. That really is, you have to buy both of us. And I got to tell you, it was because she took her job so professionally. She took it as important as I did, maybe more important. She would always say, you can't be a successful lawyer without me. And I agreed with her. And so that's what I got to, it really is, a lot of this is mindset and how you present yourself, how you show up, and how you maintain your relevance in a constantly changing business world. Emily?
So Johnny comes at it from that perspective. I think I shared with Bonnie is I worked my way through law school. By day, I was an EA. And for me, it was so important. I'm a learner. It's one of my top 5 Gallup strengths. And so to be in that job, I didn't just think about learning about my division that I worked for or the vice president that I worked for. And I think people need to understand that job, there are usually 2 routes. You got people who are career admin and EAs, and you have people who understand the value of having that position as a foundation for your career. Both are so important. But you as the EA have to make that decision on which track you're going to take. So I'll say, no matter what track you take, I absolutely agree with Johnny. It's about professionalism and how you carry yourself. And we're probably going to, some people are not going to be happy. We've read some things recently where people said they were upset that their boss gave them a book on grammar, that they felt that was a direct attack on them. My point of view was anything that my boss could give me that could help me be better at the job and represent him. Because one of my personal guiding principles is your work, it speaks for you. It is what you do. You don't have to open your mouth. People, that is your calling card, how you work and how you do your work. And so I just think it's really important for people to understand how important that role is. You are the first thing people see when they enter the suite. And that gives some idea to everyone else about how that executive runs their shop. And the more professional that shop looks, and depending on your industry, right? But if you're in a large for-profit, nonprofit, or a large for-profit, you got to just understand that when people come in who are executives, who are elected officials, right, they have an expectation of just a certain presentation. And it's not all about hair and clothes. It's about how you carry yourself and present yourself, even how you greet people, how much you know about that person before they come in the door. I used to love knowing tidbits about the people who were coming to meet with my boss. But that's because I had a boss who trusted me enough to actually have conversations with me about who was coming in. So the next thing I'd say is about trust. Are you somebody that's loyal and trustworthy? Johnny will tell you, and you all will probably get on this a little bit more. Talent is great when you talk about this position, but I'd rather have someone who is smart, curious, and loyal. I can teach you anything because I've been an EA, right? So I can teach you how to run my office and what I need and how best to work with me. What I can't teach is that grit, that smartness, that curiosity about how you learn and learning more. And what I can't teach you is the importance of loyalty, because discretion and I call it double D, discretion and discernment. If your EA doesn't have that, then there really is no value. And we haven't talked about technology skills yet. We haven't talked about writing. We
Right.
talked about these things that are power skills that you need to have if you're going to support an executive.
You bet it does. Now, both of you, Johnny and Emily, you've had a great orientation with your own executive assistants and history of valuing them as business partners in your careers, in your respective careers. Would you say that that is believed by the HR professionals who you represent? SHRM represents 300,000 human resource professionals. Is this a conversation that happens among human resource professionals about how are we valuing our executive assistants?
I'm going to ask Emily to take that on, because let me just answer it and then let her keep me honest here.
Okay.
Sometimes in life, I think we take the few or minority negative experiences and we say that represents the broadest group. The reality is, and I've worked in a number of Fortune 500 companies, a number of large nonprofits, as a lawyer, as an HR person, almost to a T, and there are exceptions, probably 10, maybe 15% of the people that I work with are just jerks. Listen, and these are executives, and they are jerks to other executives. It's not just about you being an EA and hierarchy. I mean, I've worked for and with some real jerks. If you pull those people out of the equation, my experience is the overwhelming majority of executives understand the value of that EA, that executive assistant, without a question. More importantly, the overwhelming majority of the executives that I've worked with say they could not get their jobs done without that person. In fact, it's a part of the job. And people used to think that when you say you need an EA, it's proof that you've made it. No, it's the only way you're going to make it. There's a difference, right?
Yeah.
And HR people will tell you, we spend countless hours, and this is where I want Emily to talk a little.
Yeah.
We invest in our EAs, we pay our EAs, we expect a lot out of our EAs.
At SHRM.
Are that important. At SHRM, at IAC, where I formerly worked, I worked with the CEO. I worked for 3 billionaires in my life. Okay, 3 corporate Fortune 500 billionaires. And most of them had 4 or 5, a staff of EAs to support one person. And the demands of those people were so intense. Now, there were times when the EA didn't meet those expectations and they were voted off of the proverbial island. But that happens to lawyers, that happens to accountants, that happens to technologists. It just happens. So I've always found that, and I'm telling you with rare exception, I have found that HR values EAs and executives generally values them. So Emily, maybe you can speak to it and you have a different perspective. Yeah. Yes, there are jerks out there, and I'm going to own
I'll give 2 examples. Yeah. I'll say what we're doing at SHRM. So one of the things that my boss allowed me to do that's a passion project for me is to be the executive sponsor for something we call AST, and that's our administrative support team. And on that team are mostly our executive assistants who support our chiefs, that is the executive team, but also a few of the women and men who serve as coordinators, because I hope later on we talk about progression, right? Because you don't get to be an EA on day one necessarily all the time within an organization. You may come in as a coordinator, as an admin assistant, and then the next level is the EA, right? So we have those individuals, they meet monthly together. And we do professional and personal development. Those are the 2 things we focus on. So on Admin Assistance Day, where of course we encourage everyone to buy nice gifts and take care of their EA, there is always a 3 to 4 hour half day session for our administrative assistants on issues. I actually polled them, we figure out, but one will be on a technical skill and one will be on a power skill. So for my first year, those who know me and work with me know that I if you tell me you don't know Excel, I'll have a meltdown. And I'm like, I don't understand why I had to use it, right? But a lot of people may not have been exposed to Excel. It was one of those things I discovered with Tammy my first year, right? And she was like, well, I haven't had to use it a lot. And so we decided to do a session on Excel. And then we decided to do things on PowerPoint as we prepare presentations for the board. Your EA, for a lot of times, is putting together those slides. And because I think I'm really savvy at PowerPoint, again, I'm a learner, so I'm going to play around with it, and I know it. I can't assume that every EA's had the experience to be there. So we find those types of issues. We find, how do you judgment? This year I want to do a lot on good judgment because it's an issue that keeps going on. I think people don't trust their judgment at work in these positions. And you've got to trust your gut judgment. And you got to know to go with your gut and fight for your gut to protect that person that you are supporting. And you got to know when you can see the signs to do that, right? So that's one thing I'm really proud of. And I always try to think holistically about what our administrative team looks like across the organization. And I really thank my colleagues on the executive team because they allow me to do that. We actually just hired a new woman. And though I don't really have to be part of her interview process, our chiefs do allow me to interview their selection for their executive assistant. And I know that's one of
the EAs do the screening?
No, the chief. So the chief for the division. So that would be my peer on the executive team. Our chief technology officer just hired an EA. So for the screening for her, she had the interview with me. And she doesn't report directly to me, but they understand my passion and how I am committed to the professional development. And one of my questions to them was, what skill do you think, what's your power skill you think you can bring and add to the power skills we already have on our administrative services team? And it is amazing because if she's going to come with experiences that the people who currently work at SHRM in those roles don't have, but because they meet each month, they've started teaching each other new skills. I don't have to do an agenda, they do it themselves. So they're empowered to do so. So that's one example at SHRM. I'd say the other thing I love when I talk about my time at Duke as an EA, and it's one of the reasons, even though I worked for the UNC system and went to a UNC system school, I'm going to always love Duke. They truly invested in everyone who wanted to learn there. And so really, I came in as a receptionist. I joke like I was that person who had to answer the phone. You're right out of undergrad and you're like, I think I shouldn't have to answer phones and do all these things. Yeah, I had to do all that. So I had the attitude adjustment that I needed early on and got that check. But literally all the coursework that I wanted to take was provided by their professional development on site. And you really could take anything you had an interest in once you got approval from your supervisor. They had a budget to do it. It was never a question. You never felt like low man on the totem pole in terms of access. And so you start as a receptionist and then you're an admin. You saw where you could go. And my goal was always, I want to be EA because I know once you're going to EA, you can pay month, you know all the perks, right? Now, mind you, I'm in law school, right? So of course I know, but for me, it was important to know where I could go in that time.
Yeah,
I left there.
That is a real frustration for assistants around the world, Emily. And I'm so delighted. And I was when I first spoke with the two of you about how positive SHRM is being so proactive about promoting executive assistants. I just want to move to the when I sent Johnny originally the article that I wrote called "How is HR Really Deciding How Much to Pay You?" It made the point about money being one of the hottest buttons out there for executive assistants worldwide. I'm so delighted to know that SHRM assistants are paid fairly. And you know that because they stay. You don't stay in a place where you're not paid fairly or respectfully. But I asked Johnny and you, Emily, you were surprised that there is a great number of assistants worldwide who are severely underpaid, and they seek to be excellent. Vicki and I have been teaching for 10 years a course called Be the Ultimate Assistant. Assistants know that they need to bring it every day, excellence every day. And even so, there are many who are underpaid. So I ask you, Emily, to address what you were just saying. If there are listeners, viewers on this podcast who are either underpaid or who have HR professionals who do not see it like you do, who are not valuing them as true business partners. Because as Johnny said quite bluntly, that there are some jerks out there. And I mean, there's different levels of excellence in every profession, as you said. What should these folks do? What do you recommend if they are working in a situation where they are striving to be excellent? They are striving to work with their executives to be a partner and to further the work. What do they do, please?
So you're not going to like my first answer. And I think Johnny knows what I'm going to say, right? So if you don't value you, no one else will value you. And if you've gotten to a point where you've been trying to work within an organization to see and value, to see your value and what you add, and you think holistically they're just not there yet, and you've had patience and you said they're not getting it, they don't get it, you're walking away. There is nothing wrong with walking away. Let me just say, no matter whether there is a recession, if you are talented, you will get a job. And someone else will always see your value. And you just have to be able to we talk about it all the time. You have to bet on yourself. You can't depend on others to do that. And I literally, I don't want to keep beating a dead horse when I say this, but I tell you, my time at Duke, I'm in law school now. I changed jobs 3 times, right? I wanted to move up. I wanted to be valued and paid. I knew I can be paid, and it was within the same organization. But I was always constantly looking for opportunity. And there was
resigning is absolutely an option.
It's absolutely an option. And then the other thing I will say to you also is always look for, an opportunity to really talk to your executive about what the narrative would be when they're in the room with HR. Because your executive may see things, maybe like, I'm telling them this, I'm telling them that, or whatever, right? But are they communicating in the language that HR will understand, that I need to now reevaluate what the pay band looks like for this, right? And maybe I need multiple pay bands, right? I need my early entry EA, and you're not EA, because for me, EA is like you're the EA. But before then, in a lot of places, you were an admin assistant, and then a lot of places. So there's this kind of trajectory you have there. And really talk to them about creating this trajectory for the women and men who serve in those roles within the organization. And then you see the difference between those levels, right? Because it goes from just having a skill set to being where it's more knowledge-based as opposed to skill-based when you become an EA.
So I want to highlight something Emily just said to everyone on this call. And that is, Emily, it sounds to me like you are advocating executive assistants going to their leaders to have a conversation, to have an open and honest conversation. Johnny, you have something to say about that?
Yeah. So as someone, I'm going to take the perspective of the executive, not that Emily isn't one, but in fact, she really is. She has a large group, but I'm saying there's nothing better. And I have had, an assistant come into me actually on 2 different occasions to say, listen, I think I should be better paid. And it was such an amazing conversation because it was how it was delivered. Okay. And so I want to say that to Bonnie, Vicky, and everyone else out there. A lot of times it's not what you say, it's how you say it. It's when you say it. If I'm having a crazy day, I'm in the middle of a crazy week, you work closely. Today's not the day to come in and start talking about your salary. I just lost a good client, right? So sometimes, your day may not be their day. The key is to find the day that everyone is willing to do it. Go take them to lunch, where we can have a conversation. The time where I kind of went off on this person was, you caught me in the middle of a crisis. And it's not my problem today. It's just not. I cannot deal with this right now. And you can't take that one bad day as an indication that your boss doesn't value you. It's just not the day. That's number 1. Number 2 is to do your homework and come in and really talk about, and Bonnie, and this is so critical, talk about how you help us get the job done. I don't like the conversations that start with, well, Mary makes this at that company. Mm-hmm. My thing is, well, then go work there. I mean, respectfully, that is not the way to make the argument. The argument is to make me understand that without you, I am less effective. Mm-hmm. And you show me reminding. Sometimes it's like oxygen, you take it for granted. Sometimes I need the person. And I remember Letitia coming in and saying, do you understand last week how we got this thing done? And she was careful. She said, we got it done. I'm the person who ran to FedEx so that you could stay doing X. I'm the person who got your lunch, not because it was about servitude. I knew that my contribution, I can't write a brief, but you needed that extra time to write the brief, so I got us lunch. And that's the value. Once you put this in terms of value, for me, it sounds selfish, but then the conversation changes. But if you go in saying, it's all about me, Mr. Executive or Ms. Executive, you've got to think about how I feel and how this has negatively impacted me, and how you make this much money and I make this much money. Those are non-starters. You're not going to go anywhere with that approach. I'm telling you.
Right. So you're advocating speaking with you, the executive, and also with the HR professionals.
Well, let me say this. In
help us understand that distinction.
My experience is that you talk with your executive first, because that's the person who's going to be your biggest executive, your sponsor. They will go into HR and go all the way up the chain to HR to advocate to pay you, because their point is, I'm going to lose this person who I want if your pay policies are negatively impacting retention. So you want that partner, that executive, that chief, as Emily is the chief, you want that person to go in and make your case. You going in making a case to HR is risky.
Yeah. And I would just say executives, the chiefs that Johnny talks about, the people who sit around the table and make the decisions, right? You have to develop your own relationship with the chief human resources officer, with the people on that team who acquire the talent for you, so they get an understanding. As someone who, I actually have 2 EAs, only because one division is government affairs, and we keep a lot of that very separate from what we do in the executive office and admin services. And so the woman who manages and is EA for government affairs has a whole different set of duties than Tammy does, right? Because Tammy is in the executive suite, she manages that. But Lau is responsible for making sure we file our lobbying reports, that we're not getting in trouble there, and serving a government affairs team of 9 people, right? So you just have to really think about what the scope of those duties are, and no EA is the same, and each executive has different needs, right? For Johnny is actually, he is one of those executives, Johnny will go book his own flight. He and I got caught, trying to get somewhere last year. We were on the phone. He was checking the flights. I was renting the car. We both are very sufficient. What we need is someone who can help think ahead of us and make sure that we don't run into any issues for all the other things that we have to get accomplished.
Right. And no AI is going to do that.
Yeah.
Can we turn towards technology, since it is such a hot button?
I do have a question real quick, guys, from the viewers. So Kathleen's asking, what resources do you recommend regarding salary when coming into a new role prior to talking about money, or new role or even existing role? Is there a resource you recommend?
So I wouldn't say in general resource. I will tell you something I never looked at before, and Johnny now I look at them all the time. 990s. So if you're going to go work, you need to understand the value of the size of an organization.
The Form 990, by the way, is what Emily is, a special for nonprofits.
Yeah.
It's a form where you can go figure out salaries and at least what the highest paid executives are. But I'll let you continue.
Yes. So that gives you some idea of how much that organization makes on paper. Right now, you can go, if it's a public company, then you can go look at what they give to their stockholders, whatever. You got to do some research. You got to learn the research, right? Learn about the industry you're looking into. If that company is a company that only makes $25 million a year, and that's not a little bit of money, as opposed to 10 times that amount a year, how people are paid will be a lot different. So you can't go in thinking, you're going to get a cake when you go into a cupcake organization, right? You got to actually know what that organization makes and how much percentage of that they actually give into salaries. So you got to educate yourself. There's never going to be a list anywhere. You also need to know regional differences. I'll never forget when we first got to SHRM, it's just been 3 years. There was a woman Johnny wanted to bring from New York to come fill a position. And she quoted this, he got her in, he got her interviewing with the hiring manager, and she quoted this number that was totally out of what the geographic, ranges are for the DC metro area. And she was coming from New York. So she didn't even do the math, right? She didn't do the research to understand that if this job is making this amount of money in New York, this is the range overall geographically. And you can go to the federal register. You can look at, because a lot of the federal jobs are based on location, right? And you can get some idea of what the difference would be in pay there. So it requires for you to do a lot of personal research, ask around, ask other people. I know we're all taught not to talk about salary. And Johnny will tell you, it gives me heartburn when people tell people what they make.
Me too.
Oh my God. But
yes.
It is what it is.
It can't be taboo or forbidden anymore, especially for women, and especially for women of color.
And I know, and I'm working on it. It's a growth area, but you know, when you had, and then but anyway,
I know it can make our head explode. Let's talk about the clock is ticking. You want to start talking about tech?
Yeah, let's start. Yes, because Johnny, you talked about technically proficient when you talked about the assistant, and so I'm curious because that's the kind of default requirement on every job posting for an assistant, or really any job, is digital skills or a tech savvy assistant. I'm assuming 90 to 100% of jobs want a tech savvy assistant in that role, but how do they know? What's the assessment like? How do we remediate that? How do we encourage companies or invite companies to help keep up the skills?
Right. And Vicki, that's the question of the year, frankly. And I hope everyone on this podcast here's what I'm going to tell you. I'm paid by a board to think strategy and to deliver strategy and execute on the strategy, right? So let's say I have a presentation to a client or to my board. I need to be able to turn to my executive assistant and say, here are my ideas. Can you frame this up for me? Can you make this pretty? Can you make this tight and logical and success? This is your value. Now imagine how I feel when I walk out of that board meeting or out of that client meeting and I snag a big deal, or my board gives us, approval on something. If you were part of it with me because you were technically savvy, you helped put this together, you made the document do animation, you knew how to change fonts, you are worth your weight in gold to me. So this is not technology for technology's sake. No one's telling you go to be a coder or a programmer. We're saying that if you learn the tools that will help me be more effective, you are worth every penny, arguably more. That's the way you've got to think about technology. It's not to do it. Now, where do you go get it? We're lucky right now. LinkedIn Learning has some amazing free stuff. Heck, Khan Academy has some amazing free. There are all of these increasingly free technologies, training and tutorials. Now, if you want to go deep, you may have to invest a little bit, but Emily will tell you, go in and tell your boss. If you came into me and said, I want $1,000 to go to this course, but I'm going to learn the latest in all of the technologies that will help our office work more effectively and fancy, then I'm going to invest in it because it makes me look better. Again, you will be the beneficiary of it, and so will I as your business partner, right? That's what I'll tell you, but you got to go get it. Emily said something. I'm going to stop talking here. Emily said something. She used a term that we use a lot around SHRM, and I've used it in other businesses: smart and curious. Smart does not mean you have a bachelor's degree, a master's degree, a PhD from Harvard. I know a lot of incredibly smart people who have no formal college education. They are self-taught. So smart is like you got to even get in the door. Curiosity is what leads you to say, what's the latest new technology? How does that Slack thing work? Johnny's not going to sit down and learn Slack, but my God, if my assistant walked in and said, hey, this is a way for us to do X, Y, and Z, and I've learned this tool, and let me introduce it to you. Again, ta-da, she or he is it. And I'm really glad we keep saying he. Don't assume that every a woman. A lot of them are, but there are increasingly men going into these roles. So let me just say, the smart and curious EA is going to be well paid, is going to be sought after and recruited. I promise you, we do it every day, and it's not just at SHRM. The best ones they'll rise to the top.
I'm glad you said that. I think the biggest gap, I think, I'm speaking on behalf of all the assistants out there watching, it's not for a lack of curiosity or wanting to get the skills or needing the skills. Their biggest challenge is getting support for that, because their salary is so low, they can't personally afford it. So is it the responsibility of the organization? And I think you talked about it, like show the value of having these tech skills, because Val just, I see Val on the call. She's got her Microsoft Office Specialist Expert certification.
Yes.
And just getting that certification, which is about $1,500, she saves the executive 3 hours a week. Minimum. She's like, Adam, she says that. So,
and she's so right. Yes. Vicki, that's what the Val and others out there, you've got to come in and make that case to me. Believe it or not, as much as I value Stephanie, I don't think about those things. It's like oxygen. I assume air is going to be around, right? And I breathe in every day and breathe out, and I hope it all works out, right? And you don't miss it until you don't have it. But it would be so, each of you on this phone, hear from me directly. If you go in and say to let me tell you what I've done the last couple of months or whatever to make us more effective, to get the job done. And let me tell you how much more effective we could be if you invested X in this, not just in me, but in us. It's all in how you position it. Everyone is ultimately a little bit of a mercenary, right? We all are going to do what's in our best interest. So what you've got to do is make the case that investing in my professional development benefits you.
Mm-hmm.
And Vicki, I'll say one thing. You all are going to get me for this too, but I love to be provocative sometimes. I learned it from my boss. So sometimes I would rather have that seasoned old school professional who knows how to develop relationships across the organization to get the work done that has to be done. So she may not be PowerPoint savvy, but she knows the person in creative services who would love to say that they helped the CEO put together his board presentation, and she gives them the opportunity to do so. Mm-hmm. So don't always think that you've got to acquire every tech skill or every specialized skill. If the organization is large enough, there's someone in the middle of that organization who would love the opportunity to be tapped to come help you with a project that ultimately my CEO is going to leave his board meeting and say, who helped out with that? And I get to name drop that person who he or she may have never known before. And if you're my CEO, next thing I know, I'm sitting in his office having lunch with him because I got an open door CEO. It's my chief of staff, that's a whole other issue I have to deal with, but I've got an open door CEO. And that's why, so I said, there's more than one way to skin a cat. So yes, if you are able to get the skills, but sometimes depending on the role that executive has, I just need someone with the get it done attitude that figures out how to make the net work for them internally and even externally. They may have a niece and nephew that knows how to do it, and they call them and say, I need some help here. So don't think that there are no other options. You got to use, I see someone says the EA must have resources. Yes, they got to have that little black book of people who they can call. And that only comes from years of being in the role and understanding that that's a power seat that they've got to engage the power.
Right. We know that assistants need both the soft skills of, high EQ and those relationships and the tech savviness. Johnny, we would agree. And I know Vic probably wouldn't say this, but I'm going to say it for her. LinkedIn Learning is great. Khan Academy is great. What assistants are talking about globally is that what they need are specific skills, specific and focused on the EA role. That training is great, but Vic happens to run the Red Cape Academy. She trained Bill Gates's team. She's trained Buckingham Palace staff. The difference is specific and focused to the role. And historically, that represents a change, doesn't it? Because 20 years ago, it was very odd to have a training budget for assistants. May I ask, at SHRM, do the executive assistants get an annual training budget that's a given that they get to pull from?
Yes. And not only is it, we actually have a bigger problem. Okay, talking about potentially upsetting people.
Talk to us.
We have more of a problem getting people to take advantage of those dollars.
What? Interesting.
I tell you the number. And listen, I get it. I'm a single mom. I'm supporting you 50, 60 hours a week. I've got to, there are a lot of, I'm really sensitive to, that extra 4 hours a night. And especially now since COVID, I'm homeschooling a lot of times. Like I've got a lot of pulls on my, so I'm not, I'm very high on empathy, not like my colleague Emily. I'm very, very high.
He just threw you under the bus, man.
But it really is important to think about this in the context of people having competing interests. But I will tell you, and I'm going to say this, and I really mean this. It is in both of our interests for you to be successful as an EA. I'm more effective at my job, as I've said in the beginning, and you will make more money and have more job security. But that requires that you not put it all on me. I know that I have a law license, right? And I have to every year go get, updated and keep my license. I have to pay for that. I have to find the time to do it. And guess what? Mostly ladies on the phone, but to my guys as well. I'm a single dad. I have a 10-year-old daughter. So I have to make it happen. And let me just tell you, the days that I'm sitting in a meeting at 5:30 and my daughter has to be picked up by 6, as we know, those of us who know daycare, every minute that you're late, you pay $5 or whatever, right? When my EA sitting outside says, it's 5:45, I'll be back. I'm going to get your daughter. And when I don't have to think about that, that's the value. So it is, yes, the technical competency, but it's the get it done attitude. It says, I'm going to make sure, Johnny, that you and I are successful. That's if you just could sell that to your boss, your manager, you will, 90% of your problems are going to go away. But if your positioning is this, what can you do for me? Right. You're not going to win the game. It's just not going to work.
Yeah. Wow. And I say sell it to your boss, but also know the climate. Johnny talked about you got to make it the right day when you have these discussions too, but also understand that if your company is one of those companies that hasn't been doing really well during these multiple crises we've been dealing with, right? You got to have that good judgment to understand that this may not be the time. Now, I know many companies, we were on the American Workforce Policy Advisory Board. Johnny sits on that board, and there was tons of discussion about reskilling and upskilling long before we had COVID. And now it's an even bigger discussion that companies are investing in their people, but you've got to ask for it and advocate. You're going to just sit there. Now, I'm one of those people that likes to learn. I think I should know as much as I should about all of our employees because I'm chief of staff. So I challenge myself. And so I'll know who's in school and who's doing this. Right. And I'm saying, why aren't you trying to get in front of this chief in that department if you work here, but you want to be in comms, right? Why aren't you doing those things? So you got to invest and you got to advocate for yourself and figure out how to make things happen for you as well.
Yeah. Lilia, let me just say this. I think I'm pronouncing her name right. Lilia asked about what's a good budget number. $1,500 a year is a good training budget.
How much?
$1,500
a year. Anything now, it could be higher, it can be lower, depending on. But a good safe number. We budget $1,500 per employee.
Got it. And I'm here to tell you that nationally, we're hearing numbers more like 5,000 a year.
Yeah.
But my hope is that we can continue these conversations with HR, with you both, plus the people you represent, to talk through why does it make sense to have it be a number like 5,000. Sometimes it's unlimited, sometimes it's nothing. And of course, I think we're agreeing that it can't be nothing anymore.
Well, can I just say something really quick, Bon? It's like, if you feel like for anyone watching, if you feel like you don't have a training budget, there's a chance there is one. You just need to ask.
That's right.
There you go.
And important, Bonnie, before you move on real quickly, I mean, $1,500, the way we budget at the corporate level is we say $1,500 per person over 10,000 people. That doesn't mean every person gets $1,500. It means you can make the case for 5,000. Someone else may only get 500 because of what they need. So you asked the question about the budget number. That's how we as corporations typically think about it, somewhere between 1,500 and 2,500. I'm surprised to hear about the 5,000. That seems like a really big number, but it is what it is. I mean, most of us have the tuition reimbursement number can be as high as 5,000. I've seen those pretty high. I would be surprised to hear pure professional development, non-tuition reimbursement, that high. Good if you're in that space.
And of course, the assistants have to make their case for it. Absolutely. And it should be relevant and specific to their role. In some cases, an assistant would bring more value to the company if she or he got her MBA or the project management certification, or get certified with Vicky in Microsoft Office, like that. Emily, yes or no? We're going to bang through a few more questions before we wrap up. Emily, we know that assistants globally see and hear everything. Assistants see and hear everything. They're the eyes and ears of companies, and they get hired at companies, and they know things because people are talking to them. People will say things to assistants that they would never say to an executive. Yes or no? Are you aware of that?
Yes.
Yeah, because when you were an assistant, people said things to you that they would never say to an executive, right? And probably people would say things to you that they wouldn't say to Johnny. My point or question to you is, assistants globally say that they often feel under leveraged, that they have opinions, they have input about things like the working from home situation, open floor plans, disaster planning, onboarding. Does HR want to hear from assistants about the things that they feel they have important information about? Please.
So I think, yes, short answer is yes. Any information that will help the business as a whole is valuable information, no matter who that information is coming from. So my question back to EAs, are you sending off notes to people when you have ideas? Heck, 5 out of 10 may not get answered, but that one may get it. Or I may read it and say, that's a great idea, use it, forget to send you back a note, and then later on say, oh my gosh, by the way, Tammy, when we were talking the other day, I used your idea at the executive team meeting. So absolutely, all of this we keep saying, it's a two-way street. So when they have ideas, and if they're hearing something that could really help the business, especially during a time like this, I chair our crisis team, right? So, hearing from our EAs about the impact of working remotely and all of this stuff, right, is crucial. And we have an open door where they feel comfortable doing that too. And that's a culture issue that Johnny will probably get into.
Can I jump in very quickly?
Yeah, please.
Including gossip. Everything, all information is good from an executive's perspective. So let me tell you all out there, I expect my EA, in fact, we got into a little battle several years ago because she heard of something and she kind of dismissed it as gossip. I said, but I needed to know that gossip. It matters too. Yeah. So absolutely that you got to think about it that way.
You don't know whose that is? Yikes. Sorry about that, guys. You need to know. Olympia Dukakis, who I worked with for 25 years, she wanted to know what people were saying.
That's right.
That's really important for everybody to be hearing on this call. Next thing is up. There's no way we could do this podcast without bringing up workplace bullying. And the SHRM did a study in 2019 that reported that 1 out of 7 people at work do not feel safe. And that's what we hear. I call it a global epidemic. What can EAs do, Johnny, to support HR? And it often feels like there's so much fear around these issues. There's trauma that lasts for so long around these workplace bullying issues. We know this because the articles I write on LinkedIn, when it comes up at our conferences and at workshops, it's a hot button, and assistants have been affected by this in a huge way. Can you please briefly address this with HR and what we can do?
Very briefly, and it's a follow-up to your last question. You've got to talk about it. You would be surprised how little we actually know about what's going on day to day, because to your point, there are things an EA will say to another EA, et cetera, but it doesn't escalate. It doesn't go up the chain within the organization. So you've got to have a really good bond and relationship with your manager, to whomever it is you report, and then talk with them so that they can relay those things up the chain. I mean, rarely are you going to have total access to the CEO, so you've got to use the person, your entry point, to get that across. All of us as CEOs want a strong culture. We do not want people to come to work feeling unreasonably. Now, I don't think you could be guaranteed safety in the workplace because you never can, but we can provide a much better and safer workplace in some instances. But we can't fix that we don't know. So if I can give you any advice, it is to make sure, no matter how small the issue is, and this is when I talked about gossip before, you've got to relay this on to your manager so that they can escalate it and socialize within the organization.
Wow. Okay. We're heading towards the top of the hour. I just want to say that my hope is that we will be able to continue the conversation
I'd love it.
with the members of your community. Emily, may I ask any last thoughts that are burning that you must share with our community?
I just say is that you really have the power and the choice of how things go for you in your professional life. I think that EAs are the foundation of any organization. If you have a great pool of executive assistants, that means that the executives really can focus on the things that they're supposed to be focusing on. And I just think it's important for you as an EA to understand your role there, to embrace it, take advantage of it, leverage it when you need to do so. And also, don't undervalue it when you're sitting down, which I hope you're sitting down quarterly and updating your resume. Hope you're doing that. Whenever you've done a project that you've not done before, make sure you add it to that list. Continue to invest in you. One of the things that Johnny knows will set me off is when people say, well, there was no money in the budget. And I'll look over and you have that Gucci bag I wanted in high school that I could never get, right? Or you got the red bottoms that I still don't have, and I'm the executive, right? We invest in those things that are important to us. And if your learning is not important enough for you to write the check as opposed to your company, then that's something you got to worry about for yourself. Because I want someone who, I wrote tons of my, and Johnny will tell you, it's just now where I actually send in my stuff to get paid for my CLEs, get reimbursed and things like that. But to me, it's once I invested and paid for that, no one could take that from me because I got it on my own.
You put skin in the game, and that matters to be feeling like we're worth it. Johnny, any last thoughts from you, sir?
Yeah, for everyone out there, listen. I'm not saying this just because I'm speaking with you all, but the most important person on my team is my EA. And that's with me saying this with my chief of staff on the phone on this call. There's no question. I cannot do my job. It's like going in and having one arm. Could I pull it off? Yeah, but it's really nice to have two. And I see my EA as an appendage, as a part of me. It is incredibly important that you think of yourself that way. And here's the truth. If you're in a shop where your boss doesn't value you, then get a new job. Now, I'm not saying quit your job without a job. I'm not, living in la la land because we all have bills to pay. But then it becomes your job to make sure you have the skills to go to the market. There are real jerks out there. There are people who will never, ever value you. You owe it to yourself to then go to a place. It's like any other relationship. If you stay in a bad intimate relationship or a bad professional relationship or a bad friendship, shame on you at some point. So make a plan. Do something about it, get the skills you need, and go to the market and network. Networking is so incredibly valuable because we all can help you get your next job. So don't stay in a situation that is unhealthy. And I would say that to anyone, no matter the nature of the relationship.
That's great advice from both of you. Johnny, one last question. What's one of your favorite quotes?
Oh my gosh. I have so many. Let me think. The one that when someone shows you who they are the first time,
believe them.
Believe them.
Interesting. Well, Emily, Johnny C. Taylor Jr., we are so grateful for your time and your generosity, for your expertise. I know that everyone on this call learned something today. It was so important to hear straight from HR about what is happening. There are so many questions we didn't get to.
We'll be back.
Okay. All right. There's going to be a part 2. You heard it here. We thank both of you. We thank all of you for listening here today. And Vicki Evans, do you have any last thoughts, ma'am?
This was like a race. So I'm looking forward to the next session that we have together. There were some questions about the recording. So the recording will be posted on all of the channels that you're watching the live session on. And then we'll also have it on the betheultimateassistant.com website. We ready to conclude, Bon?
We
Happy
are.
New Year. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone.
We have
That concludes today's episode. We'd love your feedback, topic ideas, and questions. Visit the podcast page at betheultimateassistant.com. Thank you once again to our guests, Johnny C. Taylor Jr. and Emily M. Dickens, and to you for listening and watching today. We'll see you next time. Bye, Bon.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, guys. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year, everyone. Stay safe.